There's an 11-year-old child in your office who refuses to go to school. In fact, he's not been to school regularly for close to a year, and the parents are losing their mind. Nothing has worked. Not the police, not multiple therapists, not threats, bribing, yelling, or coercion. And now they are in your office for family therapy. So what are you going to do? I'm going to walk you through this mainly fictitious family crisis as a structural family therapy case study on school refusal. So let's meet the Richardson family, our case study guinea pigs. We've got Dad, who's 47, Mum's 45, and their 2 children, Alex, who's 11. There's also an older brother, Marcus, who's 19, who's out of town at college. Parents, they've been married for 20 or so years. Mum used to be an elementary school teacher before the kids were born, and she took a year off, but found herself extending her leave as her first child needed some extra support. Dad was earning enough money, so by the time the second kid came along, she'd fully embraced the stay-at-home mum role. Occasionally, she substitutes at the local school, but has largely put her career on hold. Dad works for a famous tech company. His work involves a lot of travel to different places, which means he's often away from home for days or weeks at a time. He's the primary breadwinner and takes his responsibility very seriously. Our identified patient here is Alex, who's nearly 12, and he started complaining about school close to a year ago. His explanation was that he didn't have any friends and he hated his teachers, but since then, he has developed some rather distressing physical symptoms such as vomiting and abdominal pain and headaches. There's no medical reason that doctors can find to cause this, and the symptoms seem to magically appear when he's confronted with going to school. I'm going to walk you through this as a case study, starting with the systemic data that's collected about the family in the first session, the information that I got from a bit of an enactment, and how we use all of that to create a family map. We'll run all of that information through my hypothesis generator, and I'll show you how to convert that into treatment plans and ultimately your interventions. When the Richardsons arrived, I noticed that Alex was ushered into the office by his father, with his mother following behind, picking up Alex's coat that he'd left behind in the waiting room. Both parents appeared pretty anxious. They smiled at me briefly as they walked past me and came into my office. Dad looked at his wife, motioned to the sofa, and there was a pause, and they both seemed to be waiting for Alex to take the lead, which eventually he did, and he sat next to his mum on one of the sofas. I noticed that Alex and Mum both looked quite anxious, didn't really seem to make eye contact with me, whereas Dad took the sofa closest to me and almost immediately began telling me everything. I wonder if you've already got a bit of an idea of what's going on in this family, at least with regards to the structure. There's information already that I'm picking up on that's informing my case conceptualization. The wheels are already turning, and I've not even sat down and said hello yet. Now, for sure, it's too soon to know if they're going to be useful or real, but they might be telling me something about the structure and the problem. The family can't tell you about the structure, but sometimes they show you their structure in where they sit. If you think about it, they could have all sat on one of the sofas in my office, but they chose not to. That means something to me. Alex could have sat on his own chair, so maybe that says something, and I marked that down on the handout for sure. I'm also interested in what the family shows us about their structure, about how they entered the room. Was it chaotic? Was it orderly? It really seemed to me that Dad was a bit of a drill sergeant. He was kind of calling the shots, seemed like he was very much in charge, so that went on my notes too. The session starts and Dad was pretty animated and described how concerned he and his wife were. He admitted that he was quick to get frustrated and had yelled and blamed, but there was something about his explanation that felt a bit scripted to me for some reason. Mum and Alex were more quiet on the sofa. They eventually began contributing to the conversation, but talked about the day-to-day battles of trying to get Alex to go to school and him refusing, crying, occasionally vomiting in a really sort of mild, measured way. I tried asking Alex a few questions to get him involved, but he was pretty reserved too. Halfway through the session, though, he said he had to go to the bathroom. The family kind of looked at me at what to do, and I motioned for them to go ahead and sat back just to see what would happen. And within a few seconds, both parents instantly moved to help Alex. Mum led him outside to the restroom just outside my office, and a few moments later, Dad went out to check on them. Eventually all came back, later telling me that Alex had just had one of his spells and had thrown up in the bathroom. That was a spontaneous enactment. The whole point of enactments is to give you the real data of how a family interacts. They're a vital part of getting information about a family, and you can also use them to make changes in the family. So what did I notice in this spontaneous enactment? Well, everyone in the room rushed around Alex as soon as he said he didn't feel well, and they both essentially took him to the bathroom. Now, I didn't check this, but I do assume that they waited outside and didn't go in with him, but for all intents and purposes, they may as well have. That tells me quite a bit about boundaries. So here's a quick pop quiz. What do we think the boundaries are between parents and child based on what I've shared with you so far? Porous, healthy, or rigid? No, and there's no prizes. Sorry, it's too easy. But I'll tell you anyway, I'm picking up porous boundary vibes here. And if you're thinking systemically, you might have picked up some other bits of information to back that up. And I wish this were live somehow so I could actually ask you. So I'll tell you what else I noticed that informs this idea around porous boundaries. It was the mirroring between Mum and Alex. There was something about Alex and his mum's quietness that was potentially indicating they were sharing the same feeling. This is one of the 6 indicators of porous emotional boundaries, but this one is probably the most obvious. Porous boundaries means that feelings between two people get spread or shared. It's like emotional contagion. So we've got enough information at this point to do a quick family map. This is one of my favorite tools that I think every family therapist should use. We'll start with what a healthy family looks like. So a family map uses squares to map out everyone in the system. And we put people with more power or influence at the top, just like an organization chart would have a CEO at the top. In families, we want to see caregivers or parents, this case, mum and dad, up at the top. Now, they're in a subsystem as parents, and they're separated with a nice healthy boundary from the sibling subsystem. Don't forget there's the elder brother who's away at college, and obviously there's always going to be an IP in the family, and that's Alex. So this is what we would hope to see in a healthy family, the ideal version. Obviously, I've got to take into account social and cultural influences that are important to the family. That might change it somewhat, but I cannot think of a single exception to the rule of me always wanting to see caregivers on top and healthy boundaries separating them from their children. Now, in our family story with the Richardsons, I'm moving the brother out a little bit as he's at college. I'm moving Alex in just a little bit as he's kind of the only child, at least right now. I'm going to make dad a little bit bigger. We can play with sizes of squares in a family map to indicate whatever we want, but for me, it's always about sort of presence or power or who is taking up most of the space. Given how dad took control of the session, kind of appearing to be in charge as the spokesperson and telling people where to sit, I'm tempted to give him a bit more emphasis on my family map because compared to mom, he seemed to be kind of more in charge. But I also picked up on a bit of distance between mom and dad. They don't sit next to each other. She seems to sit back and let him do the talking. And I also know that there's literal distance with dad's job. He's just not around as much. So I want to indicate the porous boundaries that I'm picking up on between the parent subsystem and the sibling subsystem. There's a little too much sharing of feelings going on between mom and Alex, and the way they both jumped to attention when he said he felt sick makes me think that there's some porous boundaries there. So if family mapping is my favorite tool for systemic family work, then circular questioning is a close second. These are really helpful for getting information on what a family map looks like, and also in finding out the cycle of interaction that goes on around the problem. So if we can find out this cycle of interaction, then we have a chance to break patterns because it's just a chain, and you can break a chain at any point. In terms of circular questioning, some of the questions that I asked were, Mom, when Alex is having a tough morning before school, who does he go to first for help? And what happens after that? Dad, do you agree with that? Do you get just as involved or do you tend to stay out of it? When Alex isn't feeling well, how does this change everyone's day? Who has to adjust their schedule the most? What about work commitments? How does your day change? Now, Alex, parents have to be part boss, part friend. Sometimes they have to be someone you can talk to who helps you, and sometimes they kind of need to be telling you what to do. What percent boss and what percent friend are each of your parents? So the questions I asked gave me more of a sense of what happens around Alex's symptoms, and it also helped me get a clearer idea of the family map. So Alex experiences anxiety about school, and Mum will try first of all to soothe him, make sure he's okay, and then try and get him ready for school, convincing him, cajoling him. At some point, he will run to the bathroom, often locking himself inside. There might be some vomiting, there might not be. But that is when Dad gets involved, if he's around. Dad is more of the heavy guns that get called in to back Mum up. But these days, it just doesn't have the desired effect. And literally any attempt to get Alex out of the bathroom triggers a series of these vomiting attacks, crying, headaches. These episodes are incredibly distressing for both parents, so much so that they've started avoiding any confrontation that might trigger these attacks. Even school authorities have backed off because they're worried about causing more physical symptoms. And Alex is getting into the habit of just staying home from school. Essentially, what started as a complaint about anxiety has evolved into a powerful cycle which reinforces itself and prevents him from actually attending school. And the more people attempt to try and make him go to school, that makes the anxiety worse, so they back off, which reinforces the idea that having anxiety means he doesn't have to go to school. And that means that the cycle maintains itself. The more parents back away from confrontation out of concern for Alex's well-being, the more power those symptoms gain. Their completely understandable desire to protect their son from distress has actually created a situation where his symptoms now control not just his schedule, but the entire family. That is how good circular questioning can be. So with all of that data from observations, the circular questioning, and other bits of information from a regular intake, I'm going to put it all together and run it through my hypothesis generator. The first part of my hypothesis generator is getting clear on what the problem is. School refusal, manifesting through physical symptoms, vomiting, stomach pain. The family really sees this as Alex's problem, but it is maintained and possibly protected by family patterns of interaction. It seems that symptoms worsen whenever there's any confrontation about going to school or people pressuring him to go to school. The second part of my hypothesis generator is about process, and it's less about words that are said and more about patterns of what goes on with those words. And what it made me realize was that parents' attempts to solve the problem, yelling, screaming, coercing, bribing, didn't work. And now their current solution is to back off to prevent more vomiting and more headaches. But by backing off, they're actually reinforcing the idea that he should have anxiety, stomach aches, and throwing up. There's also another process where Mum rushes in to comfort and protect. Dad sometimes gets frustrated, but generally stays on the outside. The family organizes itself around avoiding Alex's distress rather than addressing anything deeper. Third part of the hypothesis generator is all about proximity, how close and how distant people are. I've got a suspicion that there's a lot of distance between Mum and Dad, literally because of his job, but also it's some emotional disconnection that I'm picking up on in our session. And of course, there's clear signs of emotional blurriness between Mum and Alex, and even Dad and Alex. The way Mum and Alex mirror each other's anxiety and body language, they sit very close to each other, but the way that both parents rushed in to soothe Alex in my office made me think that there's some porous boundaries between the parent subsystem and the child subsystem. The proximity part of my hypothesis generator made me think about the older brother who's literally created distance by moving out to go to college, so I have to factor that in somehow too. That might have created a quite significant shift in how close the family feels when somebody moves out. The next part is all about power. Now, despite Dad appearing to be in charge initially, it seemed to me that Alex's symptoms actually hold way more power in the family system. When he has one of his spells, just like he did in my office, it seems that they control the family routines, the family decisions. They get Mum and Dad running around for him. There's power in the fact that both parents have become hesitant to exercise their parental authority because they're afraid of triggering symptoms. Kids and teens gain power not through respect or authority, but through wielding fear. I think using fear is probably the only way that a teen or tween can get any power in the family. The final part of the hypothesis generator is about patterns. So there's this clear cyclical pattern. Alex has anxiety, goes to the bathroom, confrontation makes it worse, parents back off to prevent it getting worse, but that reinforces Alex's symptoms and increases the likelihood that he's going to have anxiety the next day if anyone mentions going to school. The problem is that the more the parents accommodate to the symptoms, the more entrenched that pattern becomes. So my working hypothesis centers on a family organization that's become dysfunctional due to not being able to adapt to various transitions. Now, timing is really significant. Marcus leaves for college, coincides with Alex's transition into adolescence, and most importantly, the onset of his symptoms. That could be a double impact that appears to have sort of frozen the family somehow. Ideally, you want to see parents adapt and grow as there are these life changes, but often families get stuck when there's a big transition and they can't get the new skills and tools that they need to go with the flow. And as a result, the parents have become particularly child-centered, which might be serving as a distraction from addressing the distance that they have in their own relationship. Or perhaps having one less kid to look after during the day is making mum more focused on Alex. But his school refusal, while appearing to be the central problem, is actually helping the family avoid exploring their issues. So while Alex's symptoms really do appear to be the central problem, it could be that those symptoms are actually helping mum and dad avoid looking at what is going on in their relationship. His symptoms are effectively keeping the family organized around his needs. Perhaps they're maintaining his parents being active parents. Potentially, this applies more to mum, who is a stay-at-home mum. What is she going to do with two teenagers, one of which who's just left for college? Essentially, Alex seems to be sacrificing his own developmental progress. Going to school is a developmental progress to stabilize the family system. But the way he's doing it is actually keeping everyone stuck. So the work ahead for the family comes from looking at the family map. I've got to get the family from this to more like this. And for me, it starts with a good reframe. I've got to help the family see the problem in terms of relationships rather than having a problem with a kid who has anxiety. I've got to help them see that they're all involved. Their current view of having a sick kid and that nothing works is really limiting. So a reframe will provide them with an idea that they might have some agency to change things. I've also very clearly got to put parents back in power. They've let this kid creep into the parent hierarchy. Getting them aligned on what is acceptable and what's not acceptable means reducing the power Alex has. And we do that with rules and consequences, and it's probably going to be quite painful. I've also got to work on those porous boundaries, perhaps by encouraging mum to have interests outside of being a parent, so she's not so overly focused on being a mum or overly focused on Alex. She needs a bit of a life. Let's not forget about dad, though. He's got to be brought into this system more. He's too far on the outside. He's definitely got to be more allied with mum as being a co-parent. He's got to show a united front. He can't be the angry one and mum being the nice one. It's a big red flag. They both have to be firm and a united front. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how I would involve the brother or if I involve him, but if he's home over one of the breaks, I'd definitely have him in for a few sessions. I'd want to know his take on things and see if he can provide any more information. All right, that was my case conceptualization. Feel free to leave me questions in the comments. I love hearing from you.